Why would a man who once called himself the most handsome person on the planet ever admit on the record that he doesn't believe he's good enough? Why would someone whose face has been called worldwide handsome by millions describe himself in his own words as someone who lacks in many areas? And why did the same man who built an entire persona on confidence once say, quietly, almost as an aside, that stepping on stage still makes him nervous every single time? There's a version of Seokjin that the world thinks it knows. Cocky, playful, the self-proclaimed worldwide handsome, the guy who turns a joke about his own face into a global catchphrase over and over without ever seeming to flinch. But somewhere underneath that title, a title he gave himself on purpose as a bit, there's another story, one that doesn't get repeated in highlight reels or fan compilations, one that only shows up if you sit with his actual words in actual interviews over actual years. So here's the question that this video is going to try to answer. What is Seokjin really protecting when he keeps calling himself handsome? Let's be clear about something before we go any further. This isn't a story about tearing down a nickname. Worldwide handsome isn't a lie, and nobody watching this thinks it is. This is a story about what a joke can be used to carry, and what it sometimes ends up hiding, even from the person telling it. Jin is the eldest member of BTS, the 7-member group that redefined what a K-pop act could become on the global stage. He's also, by his own repeated description, one of the most self-critical people in that group. Those two facts don't usually get placed next to each other. This video is going to place them next to each other on purpose and let you decide what to make of the gap between them. Why does this matter to ARMY specifically? Because for years, the loudest things said about Jin by strangers, by hosts, by headlines, has been about his face. And for years, in quieter rooms, in interviews that didn't go viral the same way, Jin has been saying something different about himself, something a lot more human. This video is about giving that second conversation the same volume as the first. It's December of 2017. BTS is standing at a press conference in Seoul ahead of the final stop of their Wings tour. A reporter asks Jin a fairly ordinary question, something about his image, his identity within the group, and Jin answers with 4 words that would follow him for the rest of his career: worldwide handsome. He didn't get this title from a magazine cover. He didn't get it from a fan poll or a brand campaign. He made it up. In that same press conference, Jin openly explained where it came from, that he'd coined it himself in an earlier interview, and that even he found it a little embarrassing to say out loud. But people liked it, so he kept saying it. Think about what that actually means. A performer, still relatively early in an international breakout, decides the best way to handle attention on his looks is to grab the wheel himself, to say the outrageous thing before anyone else can, and turn it into something so exaggerated it becomes comedy. It's a classic move. Disarm the compliment by owning it completely. Nobody can weaponize a label against you if you're the one who built it, and built it as a joke. For years, that's exactly what worldwide handsome did. It became shorthand for confidence, for humor, for Jin's entire public rhythm. Talk show hosts would ask him about it, and he'd deliver the line like clockwork, and the room would laugh, and it would work every time. But a joke you repeat for 8 years starts to do something strange. It becomes armor, and armor eventually tells you less about the person wearing it than about what they're trying to keep out. In 2021, during a wide-ranging Rolling Stone interview timed to BTS's Butter era, Jin was asked, like the other members, to reflect honestly on himself. And what came out wasn't the confident, self-declared handsome guy from the press conferences. He said plainly that he lacked in many areas. He pointed specifically to dance, explaining that other members could watch choreography once and pick it up immediately, while he couldn't. So he said he pushed himself harder, specifically so he wouldn't hold the group back, so he wouldn't become what he called a burden. Sit with that phrase for a second. Burden. Not less talented, not still learning. Burden, a word that implies weight, implies guilt, implies the fear of being a problem for people you care about. This is the same man who in front of cameras calls himself the best-looking person on the planet without blinking, and here, without cameras chasing a soundbite, he's describing himself as someone constantly working to avoid dragging his own team down. That's not false modesty. False modesty is performative. It's designed to be contradicted, to invite reassurance. This didn't sound like that. It sounded like someone describing a genuine, ongoing effort, an effort most fans never had to think about because the final product, the stage, the performance, the polish, never showed the strain underneath it. But this is only the beginning of what Jin has quietly admitted about himself, because the dance floor wasn't the only place where the mask came off. Around the release of Butter, WeVerse magazine sat down with each member of BTS for a series of in-depth interviews. Jin's portion of that conversation reads, in places, like a much more private diary entry than a press feature. He talked about his nerves before performances. Not a general, one-time confession, but something ongoing, something he still deals with even after years on some of the biggest stages in the world. In his own words, he gets nervous for every performance, and some performances make him especially nervous. Not occasionally, every time. Then there's the line about practice itself. Asked about the grinding rehearsal schedule that comes before every comeback, Jin didn't reach for the usual idle talking points about hard work and dedication. He said plainly that practice is honestly a burden. That word again, burden. Here's what makes this worth pausing on. Jin wasn't complaining in a way designed to generate sympathy. He wasn't asking for anything. He was just describing with unusual honesty what the process actually feels like from the inside. The anxiety before a performance, the weight of practice, the memory of being a trainee who didn't yet have confidence in his own abilities. That last detail matters too. Even in an interview conducted years into global superstardom, Jin kept circling back to his early uncertain self, as if that version of him never fully left. This is the part most people don't know, and it's not because BTS hid it. It's because a single joke, worldwide handsome, is easier to repeat, easier to meme, easier to shout in a stadium than a sentence about pre-show anxiety. The confident version of Jin was simply louder. It always is. There's a structural reason Jin's story carries extra weight, and it has nothing to do with interviews or quotes. It has to do with math. Jin is the oldest member of BTS. Under South Korean law, virtually all able-bodied men are required to complete mandatory military service, historically between the ages of 18 and 28. In 2020, following years of public debate over BTS's case specifically, South Korea's National Assembly revised the Military Service Act to allow globally recognized entertainers to postpone their enlistment until age 30. That revision bought BTS time. It did not remove the requirement. And because Jin turned 31st in December of 2022, the law caught up to him before it caught up to anyone else in the group, which meant Jin didn't get to enlist alongside his bandmates, shoulder to shoulder, the way the group had done almost everything else for nearly a decade. He went first, alone, as the Hung, the older brother figure in Korean age hierarchy, stepping away from 6 younger members who would carry on without him for a while, in a group that had never, not once since 2013, operated without all 7 present. Being the eldest in BTS was never just a birth order fact. It came with a specific kind of pressure to set the tone, to be steady, to go first when going first was hardest. And in December 2022, that pressure had a very literal, very public deadline attached to it. But before Jin walked into that base, he did something that revealed exactly how much weight he was carrying and who he was carrying it for. In the months leading up to his enlistment, Jin reached out to Chris Martin of Coldplay. The two artists had already collaborated once on BTS and Coldplay's 2021 single, My Universe, but this request was different and personal. According to reporting confirmed by both artists' own statements, Jin asked Martin for help writing something specific, a song that could say goodbye to his fans for a while and tell them he loved them before he disappeared from public life for a year and a half. What came back was The Astronaut, released on October 28, 2022, Jin's first solo single outside of BTS, co-written with Coldplay, blending English and Korean lyrics about connection, distance, and the promise of return. Martin later described the conversation that inspired it as genuinely powerful, saying the song found its shape because of what Jin had shared about having to leave for a while and missing both his band and his fans. Jin performed the song live exactly once before enlisting, joining Coldplay on stage at Argentina's Estadio River Plate in Buenos Aires. It was, by design, a farewell delivered in front of a stadium of strangers and devoted fans alike, days before he would step into a military uniform. 2 weeks later, the worldwide handsome title didn't matter anymore. What mattered was a 29-year-old man saying goodbye to the only adult life he'd ever known. On December 13, 2022, Jin began his basic training at a facility in Yeoncheon, Gyeonggi Province, close enough to the North Korean border that the posting itself carried symbolic weight. He was the first member of BTS to enlist. For the next 18 months, the man once introduced to entire stadiums as worldwide handsome would be known day to day simply as a soldier. There's very little confirmed detail about what those 18 months actually looked like for Jin personally, and that's by design. South Korea's military doesn't run press tours. What is confirmed is the outline: mandatory service, standard duration, and by the end of it, a rank of sergeant. For fans, this period became something rare in the modern idol landscape, an extended silence, unbroken by comeback teasers or live streams. 6 members continued their own enlistments on a staggered schedule. BTS, as a unit, effectively paused, and Jin, the one who'd always deflected attention with a joke about his face, spent a year and a half somewhere that joke simply didn't apply. But this is only the beginning of the return, because what happened when Jin came back out from behind that fence said more about who he actually is than anything he'd said about himself before he went in. June 12, 2024, Jin walked out of the military base in Yeoncheon in uniform, wearing a black beret, and was met by cameras, fans, and several of his bandmates who had taken leave to be there, including RM, who greeted him playing Dynamite on a saxophone. Later that day, during a live stream on WeVerse that would go on to draw millions of views, Jin talked about the discharge ceremony itself. He didn't perform composure. He said directly that he had cried during the ceremony, and then added that despite everything, the past year and a half had genuinely been fun, and that he felt relief at having met so many good people during his service. Notice what's happening in that sentence. It isn't a soundbite engineered for a headline. It's a specific, complicated, honest reaction, grief and gratitude sitting in the same breath. The same man who once turned self-praise into a running joke was, in this moment, simply telling the truth about how hard something had been without dressing it up. This is the closest thing this story has to a turning point, not because Jin suddenly abandoned worldwide handsome, he didn't and wouldn't, but because the discharge day made visible in real time the distance between the performer who jokes about his looks and the person underneath who had just spent 18 months apart from almost everyone he loved. Fast forward to November 2024, Jin sits across from Jimmy Fallon on The Tonight Show, marking one of his first major solo appearances since discharge. Fallon asks the obvious question, where did worldwide handsome actually come from? Jin's answer lands exactly the way it always has. Because he's so handsome, he says. He gave the title to himself. It expresses him best. The audience erupts. It's the bit, delivered on cue, word for word, the character fans have known for years. But that same month, in a separate, far quieter interview for the YouTube show Salon Drip 2, Jin said something that doesn't fit the Fallon clip at all. Talking about high-profile events, the kind where he doesn't know many of the other people in the room, he admitted plainly that he gets so lost in those situations. His words, "I'm super shy." He explained that it's his fans' presence, hearing them call his name, that gives him the courage to act boldly at all, that without that support, walking into unfamiliar rooms is genuinely intimidating for him. 2 interviews, same month, same person. One version cracks a confident joke to a roaring studio audience. The other admits almost sheepishly to social anxiety in rooms full of strangers. Neither version is fake. That's the part worth sitting with. Worldwide handsome isn't a mask hiding a lie. It's a performance layered over something real and more fragile, and Jin has simply gotten extraordinarily good at knowing when to bring out which one. So here's where all of this actually lands. Kim Seokjin built Worldwide Handsome as a shield, a joke sturdy enough to absorb attention on his looks so he wouldn't have to sit with it directly. It worked. It became one of the most recognizable self-given titles in modern pop culture. But behind that shield, in interview after interview, across years that didn't always overlap or echo each other, the same quieter admissions kept surfacing, that he felt like he lacked ability compared to his group mates, that performing never stopped making him nervous, that practice felt like a burden he carried anyway, that walking into a room full of strangers even now makes him feel lost and shy. And then there's the goodbye nobody could turn into a punchline, a man asking a friend to help him write a farewell song, performing it once in a stadium in Buenos Aires, and disappearing into a military base for 18 months, only to come back out and admit without flinching that he'd cried. That's the answer to the question this video opened with. What is Jin protecting when he calls himself handsome? Not vanity, not arrogance. He's protecting the softer, more uncertain person underneath, the one who worries about being a burden, who gets nervous before every single performance, who still, after everything, describes himself as shy. The joke isn't a lie about who he is. It's a doorway he built so the rest of us wouldn't have to see the room behind it unless he chose to open the door himself. He kept opening it anyway, interview after interview, year after year, in his own words, without anyone forcing him to. None of this makes Worldwide Handsome any less true. Jin earned that title the way he earns everything, by owning it so completely that it became part of the story. But the fuller picture, the one built from his own words over nearly a decade, shows something more interesting than confidence. It shows a man who works twice as hard because he doesn't feel naturally gifted, who gets nervous every time the lights come up, who left everyone he loved to go serve his country first and alone, and who still, after all of it, feels shy walking into a room. That's not a contradiction of Worldwide Handsome. That's the whole point of it. The joke was never meant to replace the person. It was meant to make room for him to keep showing up night after night, stage after stage, nerves and all. So the next time you hear Jin call himself handsome and watch the room laugh, maybe listen a little differently. Somewhere underneath that line is a man who's been quietly telling you the truth about himself the entire time. You just have to know where to look. If this kind of story, the real one, underneath the persona, is the kind of BTS content you want more of, let us know. There's more where this came from.